Europe has just crossed a line that cannot be undone. What appears to be an energy decision is, in reality, a move for survival, one shaped by fear, abandonment, and the dawning realization that help may never arrive. This isn't about keeping the lights on. It's about how nations behave when they sense they may soon be standing alone.
The Poles got approval from the European Commission to use state subsidies to build their first ever nuclear power plant. Construction is supposed to start in 2 years. They're expecting 5 to 7 years construction time. That will probably be accelerated quickly because in the world we're going to, where international shipping becomes more and more constrained, nuclear power is one of those things that'll probably continue to be a good idea because it's easier to fly in some nuclear fuel once every few years compared to the alternative of bringing in oil or natural gas by pipe or by ship every single day. So, not only is this an energy issue, it's a military issue. You see, we're in the process now of the United States backing away from its commitments to Europe, so the Europeans are being forced to take security matters into their own hands. And while you can, over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, build up fighter jets and bombers and tanks and artillery and all the rest, if you have the nuclear fuel, you can make a crude nuclear weapon in a matter of days to weeks, or if you've never done it before, months.
What Zeihan really warning about is a world where supply chains fracture and security guarantees dissolve. In that world, power is no longer defined by trade routes or treaties, but by what a nation can secure within its own borders. Energy independence becomes deterrence. Deterrence becomes leverage. And when external protection fades, the most dangerous capabilities begin to look less like escalation and more like insurance. What you just heard explains why the world is becoming more dangerous. What comes next reveals how that danger is deliberately manufactured. When pressure mounts, when negotiations fail to move in Moscow's favor, the Kremlin does not adjust its policy. It adjusts reality itself. And nowhere is that more evident than in what just unfolded near Valdai. Let's be absolutely clear from the outset. This was not an accident, not confusion, not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated deception, executed by a man who has never stopped being an intelligence officer for a single day of his life. For more than 25 years, Vladimir Putin has carried the title of president. But throughout that entire time, he has remained what he was trained to be, an operative whose primary weapon is manipulation. The sudden claims of a Ukrainian drone attack on Putin's residence near Valdai were never about security. They were about narrative control. This was a textbook staged provocation, designed to fracture Ukraine's alliances, poison diplomatic momentum, and hand Moscow a convenient pretext to derail talks it never intended to honor. The timing alone gives it away. When the story broke, the global community was waiting for Moscow's response to overtures from Washington and Kiev. The question was simple. Would the Kremlin engage seriously or sabotage the process once again? Valdai was the answer. Here is why it is absolutely certain Ukraine had nothing to do with it. First, Russian officials could not keep their story straight. Different branches of the state reported wildly different numbers of incoming drones. Some claimed fewer than 20. Others said more than 90. In a genuine security incident, especially one involving the residence of Russia's leader, such chaos and official messaging would be unthinkable. That inconsistency alone exposes the improvisational nature of the claim. Second, the announcement did not come from military leadership. It was not delivered by air defense commanders or senior defense officials. Instead, it was unveiled by Russia's top diplomat. That choice is telling. It reveals the intended audience, not Russian citizens, but the outside world. This was information warfare, not a battlefield report. Third, the operation was rushed, and it was rushed for a reason. Just days earlier, a high-stakes meeting took place at Mar-a-Lago. Moscow had hoped for division, tension, or a political ambush, anything that might weaken Kiev's position or fracture Western support. Instead, the meeting went far better than the Kremlin anticipated. Ukraine arrived prepared, backed by European allies, and kept the discussions constructive. There were no ultimatums, no condemnations, no diplomatic explosion. That left Moscow with a problem. Simply walking away from negotiations would have come at a cost. Greater isolation, more pressure, and further damage to an economy already struggling to breathe. So rather than reject talks outright, the Kremlin needed justification, a reason to pause the process while shifting blame. Almost overnight, the Valdai story appeared, but the physical reality on the ground dismantles the claim entirely. There were no explosions, no visible air defense activity, no alarms. Russian public channels that obsessively tracked drone strikes. Channels that eagerly report even minor incidents were silent. Not a single credible report of defensive fire or aerial engagement emerged from the Valdai region. Even more damning, a major nearby airport continued operating normally throughout the night. Anyone familiar with past drone incidents inside Russia knows the pattern. Airspace is immediately shut down. Flights are canceled. Airports grind to a halt because drone paths and defensive responses are unpredictable. None of that happened. Flights continued. Airports stayed open. That fact alone collapses the entire story. And yet, despite this mountain of contradictions, the narrative was still pushed. What makes this especially dangerous is not merely the lie itself, but who appears willing to accept it, despite overwhelming intelligence from Ukraine and its partners, satellite data, allied assessments, verifiable evidence showing no drones were present. Some political figures chose to trust Putin's word over facts. This is where deception becomes contagious. When evidence no longer matters, truth becomes optional. This behavior is not new. Russia has refined it over decades. The most infamous examples date back to attacks on its own cities, operations later used to justify brutal wars. Survivors, investigators, and even operatives eventually revealed how those acts were orchestrated internally and blamed on others. The pattern has never changed. Create fear, assign blame, launch aggression. It has repeated itself in Ukraine again and again. Soldiers without insignia, troops disguised as locals, units wearing enemy uniforms. Each time, the objective is the same: blur responsibility, delay response, and exploit legal and diplomatic ambiguity. That is why Ukrainian leaders, analysts, and intellectuals reacted instantly and uniformly to the Valdai claims. Their response was not shock, it was recognition. This is exactly what Moscow would do the day after any agreement is signed. A staged incident, a fabricated violation, a claim that Ukraine struck first. And just like that, security guarantees would evaporate. Russia understands peace agreements better than anyone. Not because it honors them, but because it exploits them. It knows how to hide behind ambiguity, how to mask aggression, and how to weaponize doubt. That is why agreements with Moscow fail. Not because diplomacy is broken, but because the other side treats lies as instruments. The reaction from some countries claiming neutrality raises deeply uncomfortable questions. Outrage suddenly appears when Moscow claims victimhood, yet remains absent when Ukrainian families are buried under rubble week after week. Apartment blocks destroyed, hospitals struck, children killed. Silence, then outrage when the Kremlin invents a story. That imbalance is not neutrality. It is moral failure. There is also a basic logistical reality that makes the Valdai claim absurd. The area surrounding Putin's residences is among the most heavily defended zones in Russia. Reaching it undetected would be extraordinarily difficult and strategically pointless. Ukraine gains nothing from such an act and risks everything. There is no logic here, only propaganda. And when evidence is requested, none is provided. No footage, no debris, no proof. Just the insistence that belief should replace verification. That may work on a select few. It does not work on the rest of the world. At its core, this operation had one objective. By time, delay negotiations while appearing open to peace. Avoid harsher penalties while continuing the war. Keep striking Ukrainian cities while claiming the moral high ground. That contradiction is not a flaw in the system. It is a system. And that leads to the final unavoidable conclusion. This is why trust is impossible. This is why guarantees fail. This is why every pause becomes an opportunity for deception. A state run by an intelligence network trained to destabilize, deceive, and manipulate cannot suddenly become a reliable partner. The Valdai incident was never about drones. It was about distraction. It was about control. And it was about proving once again that as long as the system remains intact, lies will always arrive faster than peace.